Simply cooking your beans can dramatically reduce the lectin content of them. So basically, cooking deactivates lectins, which is the reason that routine consumption of cooked beans does not cause people to get sick with lectin poisoning. Like, you really don't have to worry about this. So kidney beans are toxic if you consume them raw, which of course nobody does, but proper cooking neutralizes those lectins, makes the kidney beans or any other type of beans safe to consume. And not only safe, but I mean, frankly, like amazingly beneficial. So one quick point on this, I just want to add that if you buy canned beans, you notice that those canned beans are rather soft, and that's because they've already been cooked. So there's no need to worry about lectins in canned beans either.
It's really interesting because I didn't grow up eating a lot of beans. I think in general, I didn't grow up with a very high fiber diet, but we certainly had potatoes. And I was definitely, brought up to understand that you can't eat a raw potato, you need to cook it. And so I guess this is just another example of the way in which cooking really changes sort of the chemical structure of the food, and it can turn something that's not safe for us into something that's safe for us. Or in some cases, you can cook it for so long that you lose a lot of the nutrients, and it may not be unsafe, but you're also potentially losing. So the point is, you can't compare raw and cooked always in the same way.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. Cooking is changing the properties of our food. It is a form of food processing. It's not ultra processed, but it is a form of food processing. And actually, studies have shown, there was a study out of the University of California, San Francisco, that by taking literally the exact same food and cooking it, that it actually can have a differential effect on the microbiome.
Amazing. So the message I'm hearing so far is cook your beans or buy canned beans which are already been cooked. So that's pretty simple. What other research has been done so far on lectins?
Well, Jonathan, as with so many dietary fads or scary stories, it's hard to keep up with the way in which the hype is getting away from us with large-scale scientific studies looking at something like a lectin-free diet.
And I know that, again, the team here at Zoe was looking into some of the research on lectins, and actually most of this has been carried out in test tubes and on rats rather than actually on people. Is that right, Will?
Yeah, that's exactly correct. And this is a really important point. So when these experiments are being carried out, in essence, what they're doing is they're taking some completely unnatural concentration of these lectins. And, this sort of setup can give results that would suggest that lectins cause inflammation or a leaky gut. But there's a few problems that we need to acknowledge. So first of all, these studies, they don't translate well to humans. I mean, the bottom line is, like, we are not test tubes or rats. We're much more complicated than these things. And, the second thing is that for every study that says that lectins are dangerous, there are at least as many studies that say that they're beneficial. For example, there's numerous studies suggesting that lectins protect us from cancer or heart disease. These are our top killers. We want to protect ourselves from these, and lectins actually can help. So fundamentally, these test tube and animal studies are they're just not showing us what happens when real people eat real food, which is what we care about, Jonathan, at Zoe, that we want to understand, what happens to me if I eat a high lectin diet or a low lectin diet. That's what we care about.
So what do we know about the impact of lectins in the context of real food that actual human beings eat?
I mentioned that you'll find a lot of lectins in foods like legumes. This gives me a great opportunity to talk about one of my favorite foods, which are these legumes, and the studies that we have to back them up.
So, Will, what I love about you is that you could have a favorite legume study. And I guess you wouldn't be on the Zoe podcast if you didn't have a favorite legume study. So tell us about it.
I fully acknowledge that I am a nerd. This is not a mystery or a secret. So we hear from the lectin phobes that we should avoid legumes because lectins cause things like inflammation and weight gain. So here's what I would propose for a study. This is a randomized controlled trial of a legume-packed diet, like a high legume diet versus a diet with no legumes. And importantly, the researchers held the number of calories completely constant. So basically what we're looking at here has nothing to do with whether you're eating more calories or less calories. It's purely, are you consuming more legumes or no legumes? Here's what they saw. And this is amazing and kind of shocking. So on this high legume diet, lots of beans and lentils, They found that the C-reactive protein, which is a marker of inflammation, dropped not by 5% or 10% or even 25%. It dropped by 40%.
40%.
This is a really big number.
Wow.
40% dropped their inflammation marker. Simultaneously, their blood pressure and their cholesterol also dropped. But the most fascinating part I haven't even mentioned yet, which is that the people on the high legume diet lost more weight. And this is despite the fact that they were eating the same number of calories. It is not just calories.
So that's amazing. And actually what you're saying is, in this situation, the diet with the higher amount of lectins actually led to lower inflammation. So that's pretty good news, it sounds like, for fans of lectins and fans for beans and lentils, because I don't think anyone other than scientists talks about legumes that I've ever met. What else have scientists learnt from the legions of legume research that is going on?
I mean, this is just one study. It may be my favorite study, but there's tons of research on the benefits of legumes in particular. And so a notable discovery that's been found is that people who consume more legumes, they can more effectively lose weight. They have better blood sugar control. They're therefore less likely to be diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. The science also shows a decreased risk of cardiovascular disease and colorectal cancer.
So, Will, you're making a pretty strong case for legumes. They're sounding pretty good for us. Now, there's also a whole lot of lectins in other foods like whole grains, right?
Yeah, and we've been focusing on the legumes quite a bit, but this is also important and true. And so let's take a look at whole grains. In one study, they showed that by increasing your daily consumption of whole grains by just 2 pieces of whole grain bread, they actually rewarded those participants with a lower risk of coronary heart disease, lower likelihood of death from cardiovascular disease, lower likelihood of diagnosis of cancer, even a lower likelihood of death from all causes, death from respiratory diseases, death from infectious diseases, lower likelihood of type 2 diabetes, and lower likelihood of death from all non-cardiovascular, non-cancer causes, which is a huge category, but also quite important. So I have a message to all the lectin haters. Mic drop. There we go.
And that's from eating more whole grain bread, which I would never have put even that high on the list of what you might want to eat. So that is definitely you sort of waving the lectin flag ferociously. Now, the team here at Zoe also looked into some of these studies, and it seems that, in general, people are going into these consuming like really quite small amounts of grains and legumes. So is it possible that actually everyone listening to this, in general, they're probably consuming, a lower amount of lectins than maybe they would be if they were in these studies with these health benefits?
That's right, Jonathan. People who are following a Zoe lifestyle, they may be higher in the lectin consumption, but let's take a look at what's really happening out there. One study suggested that 98% of Americans are actually deficient in their whole grain consumption. Meanwhile, the average American is consuming only 6 pounds or 2.7 kilos of beans per year. So if you get nerdy, which, as I mentioned earlier, I specialize in this means that you're consuming only 2 ounces of beans per week. That's nothing. And if we pause for a second, let's just think about this. The Anti-Lectin Club is claiming that this is the cause of all of our problems. This is the cause of our inflammation and our weight gain and our gut issues. We've already discussed the science doesn't support this. Now I'm showing you the logic doesn't support this either.
So that's what the current diet of people in the US is looking like. Is there any research other than on rats and in test tubes that suggests that we feel better on a low lectin diet?
We have to understand these are highly exclusionary diets, which actually make it difficult for people to consume enough calories on a daily basis. So the result of this, if you're on a super restricted diet, then people will, in the beginning, lose weight. That's what they've seen. But there's no evidence that this has anything to do with lectins. And as for people who claim significant improvements by reducing lectins, there's a couple things that this could be. And I think that are just kind of like very clear to me. First, this could be a placebo effect. Or it could also be the result of excluding something other than lectins, such as FODMAPs. After all, our food is not just a big bag of lectins. Like, it's nutritionally complex, and there can definitely be something else in our food that's causing our symptoms.
And I think there's a study that sort of gives us some insight into this around gluten. Is that right, Will?
Yes, exactly, Jonathan. And this is another one of my favorites. So, gluten, first of all, most people don't think of gluten as a lectin. It is. This is the most famous of the lectins. It's a lectin that has a star in the Lectin Hall of Fame. So consider another randomized controlled trial in which researchers gave people, the people that they were studying, by the way, they had gluten sensitivity. Okay, these are people who report that they are sensitive to gluten. And they gave them an oatmeal bar that they would consume every day for a week.
So just a plain, simple oatmeal bar, or is there some sort of sciencey twist here?
Well, of course, there's some sort of sciencey twist here. So concealed within this oatmeal bar, they snuck in one of three things: gluten, fructans, which I'll explain in a moment, or a placebo that was sugar.
You got to watch out for these sciencey researchers slipping you oatmeal bars. Clearly, you don't know what they're like smuggling in underneath the oats. I love it.
They do sound a little bit sketchy, but thankfully we have institutional review boards to ensure that they do have ethical standards. And the study actually serves a really important purpose, which of course all studies should. So we're trying to understand, like, what is the role of gluten in these people that have gluten sensitivity? So now I mentioned fructans, which is one of the things that was hidden within these oatmeal bars. Fructans are short chain carbohydrates that you'll actually find in gluten-containing foods like wheat, barley, and rye. So like wheat, barley, and rye contain both gluten and also fructans. So they're actually a type of FODMAP. And so every person was exposed to a different bar after taking a break for a week to let his or her symptoms settle down. So basically, like, everyone is getting a chance with each one of these three bars. And during the week that they're consuming these bars, they measured digestive symptoms to see, like, how are you feeling? Bloating, gas, abdominal pain, diarrhea, constipation. How are you feeling?
So everybody got these three bars, one with just like some sugar in it, one with the gluten, which is this lectin that you're talking about, the superlectin, and one with the fructan. So what did they find?
Okay, I love this. This is one of my favorite findings in a study. So when you compare to placebo, because of course the placebo is the standard that we're going to compare to, the patients who were consuming the gluten-containing bar actually had less symptoms. Let me say that again. They had less symptoms with the gluten-containing bar and more symptoms with a placebo. These are people that have gluten sensitivity, and the placebo is causing more symptoms than the gluten. Now, when they ate the fructan-containing bar, they were triggered, and they had a massive increase in their digestive symptoms. There was clearly something going on there. So, in other words, these people who have gluten sensitivity, in this study, it wasn't gluten. They're actually sensitive to fructans. It's a fructan sensitivity, which is a form of a FODMAP intolerance.